Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Finding Your Freedom podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Carol May, who is the ADHD health coach and whose focus is to help those in midlife with ADHD to focus and eat well for energy and health. So welcome Carol to the podcast and thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Tara, for inviting me.
It's a pleasure because I am someone who has kind of recently recovered from an eating disorder and just prior to that, as I've just been explaining to you, was diagnosed with ADHD. And so for me, I'm still in a little bit of a learning process about how ADHD and food issues really fit together, because my diagnosis came right at the point when I think I was at the worst of my eating disorder and I couldn't really work out what symptoms that I was suffering at the time were they eating disorder related, were they ADHD related, or were they a little bit a mix of both. So I think a good place to start, because some people might be listening having read lots about ADHD and might suspect that they might have it, and because the symptoms can be not necessarily I think what people expect them to be, especially in women. I think people, myself included before I was diagnosed, have a kind of stereotypical view probably of children rather than adults, and lots of energy, and for some reason probably boys. I don't know why that was the stereotypical image I had, was a young boy running around the room full of energy, and a parent kind of thinking, oh, God, this just all feels too much. So let's start with symptoms of ADHD and how they would generally be seen in women, and I don't think it would be the same in young girls, but and again I know a lot of women are diagnosed in midlife. So can we talk about some of those symptoms?
Sure, yeah. For me, there is girls and teenagers and women of all ages, their ADHD journey, if you like, is closely linked to their hormones. And that is why we are so different from boys and men. So what many women describe is that there used to be this thing of what is ADD and ADHD because women are not hyperactive, physically hyperactive. Not as much, no, but now the ADD bit is like being pushed away because ADHD is a spectrum like autism and all the other neurodivergent, what shall I call them? Because there's a lot of discussion now about whether we call them traits, issues,
conditions,
whatever it is we call them, but let's stick to the word traits for the moment. And so, for instance, I look around at other women I know within my family and within my colleagues, my working colleagues, and the differences between us and how our brains work. And for a lot of us, the differences are that we have other issues going on at the same time. Yeah. So, and our hyperactivity is actually our brain. Our brain is the thing that is going at 100 miles an hour like this. And we can be perfectly still physically, and our brain is like this, right? As soon as you lie down to try and go to sleep, your brain goes like this. And I'm currently looking after my 10-month-old grandson 3 days a week. So every time I lie down to go to sleep, my brain goes, oh, nursery rhymes. And it starts doing this. And I'm going, oh, my giddy aunt, please go away. I've had enough of Miss Rachel and all that sort of stuff. And I think that, and my physical hyperactivity is I use my hands a lot when I'm talking.
Yeah.
So you may find that I haven't noticed it as much. I'm not saying it's not there, but with a lot of men and boys, their hands do not do that. They don't talk with their hands. And but a lot of my female friends do. My granddaughter does. She's only she's just 7. Um, and interestingly, school have said we won't look at testing her for anything just yet. But there are boys of her age
Yeah.
who are already diagnosed. And I think that girls grow up learning to mask
Yeah.
everything, right? They mask their emotions, they mask what's going on in their head, they will sit on their hands, they will do anything. And what I've observed a lot is parents treating girls and boys slightly differently. Not deliberately, but that subtlety is there in their expectation of behaviour. And I think that goes into adulthood and how women are supposed to behave as opposed to how men are allowed to behave.
Yeah,
And
that's true actually, because I think if you think with young boys, there's almost an expectation that boys will be a bit rowdy and a bit loud and a bit energetic, and girl will sit and play with dolls and be quiet. And just I hadn't thought of it that way until you just said it. There is, like you say, an expectation that you would probably find it very odd if your young daughter started to be very rowdy and shout a lot and scream a lot and run around a lot. But that would be tolerated with a little boy.
yeah, yeah. So my daughter was like that, my granddaughter's like that.
Okay, yeah,
And,
interesting.
and so they have a tree thing at school with these ducks on it, and they each get awarded a duck for being helpful in class, or nice to somebody, or including a child for playing in the playground and all that sort of stuff, right? And so my granddaughter goes, I've got a duck. I said, oh, I said, show me where it is. And she showed me, and it said Elsie was awarded the duck for being Elsie. Okay, right? So, and when I've observed her, you would class her, you would describe her as I would have described my daughter when she was that age, as strong-minded, strong-willed, highly opinionated, doesn't suffer fools, very, very quick in class. And the teacher goes, oh, she's really helpful because she goes around helping the other children. And I'm thinking, no, she's bored because she's finished.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? She goes around to help the other children so that the teacher will then move on with the class. Yes, she's not sitting there creating and making a nuisance of herself, right? Which one would expect of a little boy who
Yeah.
was bored. A little girl who was bored will go around and help others. But there's something else going on underneath. And I think that is what I would say the difference is between male and female of all ages, is that we women, what we do is we think, right, okay, my brain's working in this way, but actually my needs are X, Y, and Z. How am I going to get those met? And we
It's
get it
really
met
interesting, actually. Yeah,
differently. We get our
yeah,
needs met differently from the way men do.
yeah. I mean,
And
yeah, my hyperactivity, I'm glad you said that because I actually, at the time of diagnosis, I'd always had what I called, I'd say it out loud, but I really wish it was true. I wished that I could take my brain out and switch. You can just switch things off for the day.
yeah,
And I used to say that out loud. I was like, I just wish I could take it out and switch it off just for a
yeah,
minute a day. And like you say, and I suppose I suspect my symptoms got really, really bad around menopause, and by that time, I never got a second's peace in my head. Thought after thought after thought after thought, and being unable to do anything but react to every thought, leaving me doing 300 things at the same time and never finishing any of them. but then wanting to finish all of them because, like you say, we get used to, I think as women, we want to get things done. We still have to be organised. We still have to do all the things we have to do.
Yep.
And I found that absolutely exhausting, just
Yep.
absolutely exhausting.
Yep. And I think, you see, that also applies to if we are, if we're parents, for instance, we have to get everything organised for the children, for the family, for this, that and the other. If we're a father, we don't have to do that.
Yeah.
It's different. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, right? But on the whole, we women, we still work. My daughter has a very high-powered job in London. And most of the time, thankfully, at the moment, she can still work at home. But her brain is going 10 to the dozen the whole time. And she's not been diagnosed. We've never kind of gone down that road. But she's doing that. Then she has a baby in midlife. And then discovers that actually it's so much more. There's so much more to be done. And then it's, well, why isn't her partner doing stuff? Well, because he's a man, he doesn't actually expect to. And it's about renegotiating renegotiating what we need. So first of all, we have to know what we need. So renegotiating what we need in order to be able to function, and in whatever role that is. And I think that if you're dealing with both neurotypical and neurodivergent people, so you can have a partner who's one or the other, then it's about negotiating it in a way that works for both of you. And we are just not used to doing that. We're not used to asking for what we need. Yeah. And my mother used to say to me, you should know what needs doing. No, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know what needs doing, right? And then I hear my daughter saying, yeah, but her partner should know what needs doing. No, that doesn't happen like that. You have to negotiate it. And I think that is so as a woman, whether you're neurodivergent or not. But if you're neurodivergent, your needs are different. So, for instance, I'll admit it, I'm hopeless doing anything on my own. Absolutely hopeless. I cannot get the motivation. I used to think I was just lazy. It's just that, actually, my brain doesn't work like that. It cannot, it just doesn't do that. But if somebody's sitting here, they don't have to be doing anything. I get on with loads of stuff. And so what my partner and I have negotiated is that, we spend one afternoon a week where I have my list, he's got the list too, and he keeps me on track.
Right.
Right. I'm still doing it because originally my brain goes, you're stupid, you can't do this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that at all. It was the ADHD part of my brain that meant that I simply couldn't get over that hump. I couldn't get started. I couldn't inspire myself. Whatever it is, my brain just wouldn't work. And it not helped by, we've touched on this before, we are all affected by trauma of different levels in our lives. We now know that. And so depending on all the other issues that we are dealing with at the same time, we go into overwhelm really quickly.
Yeah.
So, when tech doesn't work, when a machine doesn't work, when your phone doesn't work, when my TV doesn't turn on properly, I want to throw it out the window. Well, It's a bit extreme, right? But it's
No, it
like,
sounds very familiar. I
yeah,
automatically, like you say, when something doesn't happen the way it should, just maybe for whatever reason, for 2 seconds, it's not doing what it should do. I
yeah,
automatically, all of my nerves feel like they're about to go. That I just start to feel it. I'm like, something's wrong. I'm not going to be able to make it right. I can't do this. And it might be nothing. It might be I've not pressed the button hard enough on the remote control.
anything, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I can remember. I mean, I was originally trained as a home economist, so I used to do cookery demonstrations. I wrote cookery books, all that sort of thing, and so I thought I could do anything. Well, I could, if I focused, if I could focus. And I can remember one day trying to make choux pastry, of all things. 3 times I threw it out the window because it wasn't right.
Yeah.
Right? But my then husband went, that's a bit extreme, isn't it? I said, well, it wasn't any good in the kitchen, was it? I said, I just threw it out the window. You know, and now I know that that is not me being a drama queen. That is just the way my brain works.
Can I
And that
ask
it's
you then,
okay.
that because that resonates a little bit, do you think that, well, is it an ADHD symptom? Because what resonated with me is that before I even try something, I quite often decide I can't do it, so I
Yes.
don't try, and then
Yes.
I do what, like, and it'll take me a long time to, and I'll feel nervous when I'm about to try it because I think I don't know how to do it, and I try it and it's simple and it's
Yes.
easy. And I'm like, why did I make such a big thing about that? Is that an ADHD symptom?
I believe so. I believe it is.
Well, that's
Yeah.
explained then.
Because, I mean, sometimes what my partner will say to me is, okay, he said, deep breath, pause. He said, now just listen to me. Now, that's the hardest thing for me because my brain is already 10 miles ahead of his because he's neurotypical. And, but there's neurodivergency, if that's the right word, in his family.
Yeah,
So he gets it and he
yeah,
gets me, but he also knows that he recognizes the signs in me when I'm getting worked up about things. And now I can't remember what my thread was. That's another thing. I lose my thread. I can't remember what I was
all
going
the
to say.
time. I do it all the time. I start a conversation with somebody, and then I'm just about to get to the good bit,
Yeah,
and the best bit just goes right out of
yeah,
my head. The important
yeah,
bit just goes
yeah.
right out of my head. No,
When I
we were talking about how we assume we can't do things and we procrastinate a lot
That's
before
right.
we do
Yeah.
them.
So, I said to him, I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. Now, normally, my thing would be no such word as can't, because that's what was said to me as a child. No such word as can't. But he doesn't say that. He just goes, okay, deep breath. Now let's look at this slowly. Now that irritates me because I don't want to do anything slowly. My brain is going at 100 miles an hour. But I know that if I can just steel myself to slow down a little bit, that with him, I can get stuff done.
Yeah,
And I used to see it as an admission of weakness, even stupidity.
yeah,
Now, I went to a grammar school. I was in the top set for maths and English. You know, I'm a lot of things, stupid actually isn't one of them. But because my maths teacher told me I was stupid one day, that's there, it's lodged in my brain. I'm stupid, right? And so, I know from all of the training I've had, all the work I've done, all the clients I've had, that we all come in completely unique shapes and sizes with different, unique brains, and that we all have something that we are here to share, to contribute, to do, to whatever it is. We all have that ability. And yet, and I know a lot of women do this, we tell ourselves we can't.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I could use it as an excuse. I could use my ADHD brain as an excuse for not achieving what I always said I wanted to in life.
Yeah.
But actually, there's another part of me that goes, maybe that wasn't what you were here to achieve in the first place. Maybe, your achievements were other things.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah.
So how then, because like you say, well, and I don't know if you help people generally with ADHD, but let's
Mm,
move on to then you helping people with issues around food and
hmm
how, like you say, people might have struggles with food. Um,
mm.
so tell me a bit how that became something that you decided to specialise in. Is that something that you had experience with issues with food yourself and you kind of could relate, or is it? Tell me how that came to be.
Yeah, I train. I've always worked in food my whole life,
Yeah.
and always had an interest in nutrition
Right.
and eating proper food, growing food. Um, and I trained quite some time ago, maybe 25 years ago, with Patrick Holford, which some people may or may not know him. And what have I done? See, I had his book at my fingertips, and now I can't find it. Um, okay, this is the world I live in, where I have things and it's gone.
Welcome to our world.
I have a lot of. Oh, here it is. I have a lot of Patrick's books over here, but this one about upgrading your brain, and
Right.
that is kind of the latest one. And I went to see him speak about that, and he remembered me from all those years ago. But that's what started me down that road of eating well for your brain function.
Right.
And then I trained as a lighter life weight loss counsellor. And my counselling supervisor, she said to me, you need to go and train as an eating disorders master practitioner. Then all your questions will be answered.
Right.
So I did. I went and trained with Deanne Jade, who I believe is the top person in this country, and became an eating disorders master practitioner. Everybody else in that room had an eating disorder. Everybody who trained had some form of eating disorder.
Right.
And that's when I learned that my disordered eating, there was more to it.
Right.
But I'd already had my ADHD diagnosis. I didn't connect the two at all then. There
Yeah.
were there was nobody talking about that then. And and then I spoke to a former business coach of mine before COVID, 5-6 years ago maybe, and she'd set up a new company, and I said to her, I said, I'm your ideal client. I said, because I have an ADHD brain. And she went, oh, that explains everything. Right. Okay. So I worked with her for 3 years. And what I learned through that time was how eating disorders link with ADHD, that link with hormones, that link with menopause, the whole thing, really. And I became passionate about the fact that you didn't have to take pharmaceutical medication. You could use food and supplements instead. And there is a guy out there who his work is all about that. It's all about not taking pharmaceutical medication, because I think more and more people are very wary about it.
Yeah.
And they've said there has to be an alternative. So I've been out there going, yes, there is. It's not easy. You can't just pop a pill. It's not so easy. And our food nowadays is not as nutritionally dense as it used to be.
Yeah.
So, whereas originally I never would take a supplement, I believed that food, good food, was all you needed. And I'm sure it was back when I was young, but nowadays, not so. And when you mix in all the other things that we have to deal with in life, and for me, it was the excessive amount of stress that just kicked me over the edge. Um, because I've been bankrupt, homeless, divorced, the whole kit and caboodle in my 50s. And I had no idea what stress meant until then.
Wow.
So I think that, you know, there is no, my philosophy is there's no one way that fits all. It's about being able to find our own way for our own brain, whatever age we are and whatever our lifestyle is. There is a way to get balance, which will enable our brain to function at a much higher level, if you like, because we're feeding it correctly. Now, you mix that in with an eating disorder like binge eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia, and you're in trouble. Because, you know, well, I mean, there's so many other, there's now, I think there's, remember, there could be 10 eating disorders, recognizable, you know, ones that you can be diagnosed with. And so your eating can be so chaotic that actually it's really hard. So I've now been experimenting. When I was first diagnosed, which was back in my 40s, and I'm now 71. So it was a long time ago, and routinely adults were not diagnosed at all back then, let alone women and girls. And so my psychiatrist at the time, he said, I'm beginning an experiment with some of my patients, taking very high levels of EPA fish oils, right? And he said, that's what I would recommend, because anything else, he said, will mess up all the other medication that I was on. And I started with that. So that's where I've gone back. I've gone back to omega-3. And apparently, I think it's Bristol University is doing a 12-week study with children at the moment, ADHD, not just ADHD, but neurodivergent children, giving them high doses of omega-3s. And so that's the path that I went down earlier this year. Just because I don't believe in teaching anything or sharing anything that I have not tried myself.
Yeah, lived experience.
You know, for me, it's not about what the theory is. And I've read so many books by dietitians and nutritionists, and I'm thinking, you don't get it. You don't get the ADHD brain. You don't get that actually I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to, plan my meals for a week, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. And so, so everything I do comes from a place of my own experience.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that you just want to touch on. Well, I'll go back to medication after that. So let's talk about then, because I've done some reading about this, about crossover between ADHD and people with eating disorders. And like you say, it's probably still needs more research, but there's certainly crossovers. That whether it's what, and I'm not sure, I don't know if you know, is it if you have ADHD, you're more likely to get an eating disorder, or if you have an eating disorder, you are more likely to get ADHD, or is it just that sometimes the symptoms make it hard to decipher between the two? So in your experience, and I suppose speaking with clients, do you tend to find that people have an ADHD diagnosis that can then lead to disordered eating? Do you think the ADHD plays a part in people going down a route of either eating disorder or disordered eating?
No, usually what happens is their awareness changes
Right.
with their ADHD diagnosis. So
Okay.
their awareness of their eating, and I think, I mean, there is so much out there on social media and on YouTube and on the internet, about food, eating, health, body size, all that sort of stuff, right? And so, I mean, I reckon it's something like at least 85% of women have disordered eating,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So, and obviously, a lot of those probably have an undiagnosed eating disorder.
Yeah.
And it's only when that eating disorder or that disordered eating impacts our life or our health that we may seek help about it. And so I think there are a lot of very high functioning women out there coping with either knowing or not knowing that they have an eating disorder of some sort. I think there's a lot of discussion around anorexia, but not about any of the other eating disorders. And of course, a lot of neurodivergent people, they actually, they could well be undiagnosed, but they will likely have RFED, which is the eating disorder associated with just eating very few foods and they're always beige. So, and I think we are bombarded with so-called education about what we should or should not be eating.
Yeah.
And that plays into uh, our ADHD experiences, our insecurities, all of that sort of thing. And, I mean, this is not the place to go into weight loss jabs and things, but I think that is also feeding into it right now and causing, in the long term, it will be causing all sorts of other emotional and mental health issues.
So do you think then it's with people with ADHD, if they start to feel insecure, like you say, because we're constantly fed with reasons why we should feel insecure about ourselves,
Mm.
are people with ADHD then particularly sensitive to that? Is that what you mean?
I, in my experience, and I mostly work with women now,
Yeah.
so in my experience, the answer would be yes. I'm not saying it's a definitive answer. I'm not saying there's any research on it, but in my experience, yes, that would be so. But it is very difficult to differentiate. Put things into little boxes, if you
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
But I think that first of all, it comes with acknowledging that the majority of us have issues with food.
Yeah.
And we have issues with food not necessarily because we have ADHD or autism or whatever, but being neurodivergent can amplify them.
Yeah.
So, there are, I mean, I could cook anything, right? I was trained in cordon bleu cooking and what have you. I can cook any kind of food you like. Am I motivated to do that? Absolutely not. Not now I'm on my own. When I was cooking for other people, wasn't really a problem because I became a feeder. I enjoyed feeding my children.
Yeah.
And my ex-husband was a farmer, and so he always came in hungry, right? Um, as soon as I was on my own, lost interest in it completely. And that was, I guess, the beginning of my inquiries into why that would be, when I enjoyed cooking for other people, but I could not feed myself how I thought I ought to, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, I mean, what was it? Oh, 12 years ago, I started working with someone who I would call a combination of a therapist and a mentor. And it was through her that I let go of a lot of my emotional baggage. And with it went most, but not all, of my emotional eating. That's when I first learned about intuitive eating. And intuitive eating is a whole other kind of area, but it is what I teach my clients. It's what I've taught them ever since. Is the getting away from all of these pressures to eat properly, cook a meal, sit down when you're eating, all of this stuff that we are taught. And our ADHD brain is screaming, going, I don't want to do that, for
Yeah.
whatever reason that is.
Yeah. I mean,
Right?
that's interesting actually, because I think from my own experience with where I try and make a link, I guess, between how my ADHD symptoms showed up in my eating disorder. Certainly for me, because I am somebody who, like you say, when I'm not interested in something, I can't focus at all. And show me a spreadsheet and I'm gone. Not interested. And I've realised since my ADHD there are certain ways information is presented to me that I struggle with, which I never noticed before. I just used to go, I used to say at work, I don't understand spreadsheets. And I used to think, like you say, it was me, I was stupid. But actually, I'm not interested in numbers. Numbers kind of, I can spend an hour looking at numbers and it means nothing to me after an hour. And I suspect that's, yeah, and there's other kinds of information I get presented with that, again, kind of either doesn't make sense to me very much or I'm just disinterested. And so I'm kind of learning that. But with my eating disorder, um, I so I'm either not interested at all if it's not something I'm interested in, I don't want to do it. But when I am interested or it serves me, my hyperfocus goes crazy. And so
Yep.
with in my eating disorder, because it served me, my
Yep.
hyperfocus around calories, around weights of food, around types of food, around online shopping, about nutritional tables, and all of that. I could spend, you could give me a whole day and I would still be in a rabbit hole about that. So I
Yep.
understand how some of my ADHD symptoms certainly made my eating disorder worse
Yep.
because like you say, I could completely get obsessed with things like that. With me particularly, I didn't find, and I don't love cooking, um, but that's just because I'm on my own and I think I'm a bit lazy. I don't
Yeah,
like
it
the
makes a
rush.
difference.
Yeah, but do you think with some people with ADHD that the issues with food are actually around just lack of interest or lack of motivation to eat? Could it be that as well?
I think, yeah, I mean, if your eating disorder is focused on that, then absolutely. I think that what people have told me about their experiences with medication, and I know from way back when the first appetite suppressants came out onto the market, and which subsequently were banned because they gave people heart attacks. Um, it the ADHD medication means they're not interested in food.
Yeah.
And then they fall over a cliff at some point. Now, for a lot of people, it was, depending on when they took their medication, it could be, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, for example, or 6 o'clock. At which point their hunger level goes way up, and they're going to eat anything that's there, anything and everything, because they've not really eaten all day.
Right. Because their appetite's...
And so in those, they're not going to sit to and cook at that point. That's not going to happen, because there's too much time involved in that, and they want to eat now. So you then get very disordered eating, because they're not eating in a way that supports their brain function, or their body, and I think that, for what I do with clients I've had like that is support them in a way to show, so that they can eat small amounts during the day to support their brain. It's for, why are they doing it? Why? Because they're not physically hungry.
Yeah.
So, normally physical hunger will drive us to eat, but actually a lot of people nowadays, they eat so often that they don't ever experience physical hunger. They think it's hunger, but it isn't. And so it's about not eating to a clock, but going, okay, and it's only about having, you don't have to have meals, it's about having small amounts of things. It could be an energy ball, it could be, I don't know, a few nuts and maybe a spoonful of peanut butter or something like that. It's whatever, they can cope with during the day, so that as their medication starts to peter out, the effect of it peters out, they don't actually fall off a cliff completely.
Yeah.
And also showing them all of the shortcuts to, I don't know, I mean, a lot of people, we love watching cookery programs. We watch these chefs and they chop onions and they do all the other thing and everything else. And you think, okay, yeah, I could do that. I don't actually want to right now. I don't want to do that. So how am I going to create something to eat which is satisfying physically, but will also support my brain? So, I would teach clients how to keeping stuff in the fridge, stuff they can buy in a supermarket, stuff in the cupboards, whatever it is that means they can actually eat straight away if they need to, not order a takeaway.
Yeah. I think I did try medication. It just seemed like the natural thing that it was offered to me as soon as I was diagnosed. Yeah. And I was like pretty a really bad point in my eating disorder, and it baffles me that I was given medication, and I lost weight very quickly in the first 6 months of that medication because it's a stimulant, and I also was in an eating disorder and I didn't want to eat, and I also then didn't feel any hunger. And I stopped taking the medication when I started coaching with my eating disorder recovery coach, because I knew that that it was feeding my eating disorder. I knew the reason I started taking it wasn't to lose weight, but my eating disorder was enjoying the fact that I was losing weight without even having to try. So I knew I had to stop taking it. And now I will very much do everything I can in life to manage without it. And then I realised as soon as I started to nourish myself and eat, I had to eat a lot of food to physically recover, then automatically, like you say, I really realised how undernourished my brain had been. I knew my body was undernourished. I had no idea how undernourished my brain was, and things started to change. My depression lifted. I started to feel better. Things started to become clearer. I had more energy. It sounds so obvious now, But when you're in an eating disorder, all you think about is your body, and you don't think about your brain. And
Nope.
so, you know, I my hyperfocus now is less because I'm just more regulated. The you know the constant thoughts in my head, yes, they are there, but they're not so overwhelming. And I think that is because I started to eat, like you say, for health and not for my body. And that I think that probably, and I think you'll probably hopefully agree with me, is then if what we're agreeing on is that if we are eating for our brains rather than our, I know we have to nourish our body, but if we put aside what our body looks like, the latest fad, fasting, all of the things that we're taught in terms of how to manipulate our body, that we
Yep.
should actually, especially if we've got ADHD, be
Yep.
eating to feed our brain and
Yes.
try to take out the noise of anything that's related to what we look like.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think if we focused on eating well for our brain, our health would go along with that.
Yes,
So, our health would improve, but also our ability to cope, to manage,
yeah,
to live our lives, to do everything. And I mean, my family is riddled with vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. And, you know, two of the most obvious things that we are short of nutritionally, which are omega 3s and vitamin Bs, they are essential for brain function. And if we're not balanced, and some people that I test are so out of balance is not true, it's scary. And it's no wonder that they are struggling for their brain to function. At this time of day, normally, I say normally, but in the past, by this time of day, I couldn't string two words together.
yeah,
I couldn't have come and chatted to you this evening 10 years ago because my brain was not in that place. I just couldn't function at this time of day. I just had to, well, I couldn't think straight at all. Now, what I find is that first thing in the morning, my brain takes a long time to wake up to the point where it's functioning properly. Oh, I can get up, I can, make a drink, I can drive to my daughter's around the M25 and everything else. I can do all of that. But my brain's not actually functioning in the way that I want it to, in that it could not have an intellectual conversation. But I've accepted that. And, I have medication for certain things, which I take first thing. And then from mid-morning, I start taking my supplements because I don't mix the two. And, and I know when my brain has woken up properly, completely, fully, and it's really interesting. But now my brain stays awake, so it's it's really it is interesting. And obviously we're all different. I mean, I left the menopause behind 20 years ago now, but I mean my menopause symptoms continued well into my 60s. And I thought I was going mad. But my brain clearly was just not able to cope with anything at all.
yeah.
And when I was
Well,
going
why isn't it? Because our symptoms, I think, from what I've read, like you say, in the ADHD symptoms, whether you've had it or not, before then, I think I read a figure about increased by about 49% or something in menopause. So you then have, well, with me, I had menopause, eating disorder, and ADHD all at the same time. And so I'm very glad that I'm here having a sane conversation actually with anybody. But there's probably women listening to this who actually might feel like they are a little bit losing their mind. And I think the one thing I would kind of stress around that is, like you say, it's not a time to, and menopause actually is a time when a lot of women become worried about their bodies because their
Oh, yes,
bodies start to change. And
they
so I
do.
get why people then have this awful time because we're not eating properly to try and manipulate our bodies, but our brain at that point desperately needs food. It needs us to be worrying about it and not the size of our bottom or our tummy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I used to OD on simple carbs and sugars all the time. Um, because I was just desperate to feel just a little bit of energy.
Yeah.
Now they are like kryptonite to me, kryptonite to my brain. And so, I'm not a believer in cutting out whole food groups, not in the slightest. But what I discovered by experimenting on myself is that my brain function is not helped by eating simple carbs during the day. It just isn't. So, I'm focused on healthy fats, proteins, complex carbs. And then but I will often fancy something in the evening. So if I want to, that is when I will eat some pasta or mashed potato in the winter. I want that. Um, at this time of the year when there's all the lovely Christmassy chocolatey treats and everything else in the supermarkets, I might buy myself something and, and have some of that of an evening. And because I know that doing that will help my brain to go to sleep when I do go to bed.
Yeah.
But I used to take melatonin. So, when times were really bad and I just could not switch my brain off. But of course you cannot buy that in the UK. You have to get that from elsewhere. Um, but I did take melatonin and it really helped. I must admit, it really helped then. But so I have learned by trial and error how food affects my brain. Different
Yeah.
foods affect my brain. Am I always say I am in recovery from an eating disorder because I don't believe that you're ever without it completely. And I know that even though, I am not, I'm post-menopause, I still have a monthly cycle, interestingly enough. And
Right.
that,
Oh,
so
that's
the end of
interesting.
each physical month,
Yeah.
because I was always regular with clockwork, is when I go like that. And when I get my cravings for chocolate, sugars, and all that sort of stuff, um, which I don't normally eat. My partner's diabetic, so we don't eat like that at all normally. And but I suddenly started keeping a note of it in my journal, and I thought, oh, here we go. It's actually a regular thing. How interesting is that? It's like, straight off down that other rabbit hole, as you do, you
Yeah.
know. But I think for me, it is about, instead of fighting it all, it's about accepting this is who I am. This is how my brain functions. I need X, Y, and Z. People, things, food, whatever it is, in order to be able to function at my best.
Yeah.
And for me, it's about each individual person finding what that is.
Yeah, I think I very much believe that, because now, well, I didn't believe it in my eating disorder, but in the set point weight theory, that if we, certainly coming out of recovery, if we eat sufficiently and we eat regularly to enable our body to start functioning again, we get to a weight where initially we're gaining because, well, I needed to. Not everyone in eating disorder does. I needed to, and now my body is at a point where I eat regularly and I don't restrict food anymore. I
No.
don't restrict any kinds of food anymore, and my body kind of stays around where it is. And I think that it only makes sense to me that if my body is fully functioning at a weight that is a larger body than I was in, then my brain must also be functioning properly as well. And so I think for me, I have to choose between my eating disorder body, which was smaller, or a fully functioning, healthy body and brain. And it is, I can't even explain to people how much difference it makes when your brain starts to function correctly, because you, like you say, in your eating disorder, you don't realize it is a game changer. Like
Yeah.
for me, it felt like the light went on in my head. I felt like all of a sudden everything just became clear. Yeah, I
Yeah.
still have ADHD, and yes, I still have all those thoughts, but at least the light is on.
Yes, absolutely, Tara. That's exactly how it feels for me. And you know, I have got. I was brought up to be so self-critical
Yeah,
of myself, my body, everything, and I spent my life putting stuff on hold because I didn't look right and I didn't feel right.
yeah,
Now, and I absolutely accept that at my age, and you know, most of my friends of my age are the same. We actually don't give a shit anymore about what anybody thinks about us, and we are who we are. And I have learned so much about myself, and I've done so much work on myself and done so much, and I know this is a bit of a trite phrase, but you know, self-growth work. I mean, I don't know
yeah,
what else to call it really.
yeah,
The only way I can describe it is that I have found who I actually am, who I was when I was born,
yeah,
and I think that it you know, I've now got to the stage where, I mean, I've been fighting for a knee operation, and every doctor I went to see went, "Well, you have to lose weight because it's caused by your weight," which it isn't. It's something I've had all my
the
life.
obvious, easy doctor
Yeah,
answer for everything. It's
right.
your
And I
weight.
go, and then they go, "You know, have you thought about using a weight loss jab?" And I say, "You do know, don't you, that I have had an eating disorder, and you're not supposed to say that to me." Right? It's like, no. Then I tell them how well qualified I am in that department, and that basically they can go away, and not very politely, right? Then I decide to pay to go and see a surgeon, an older surgeon, who said, "Weight's irrelevant." Because I said, "You didn't ask to weigh me." "No, I'm not interested in how much you weigh." He said, "All I'm interested in is the fact that you need a new knee so that you can live the rest of your life well." Oh, hallelujah.
Uh,
Right? But I have felt like I have battled my whole life to be the person that I really am underneath everything.
yeah,
You know, I used to say to my weight loss clients when I was doing that, I used to say, you know, we're born like this little kernel here. I said, and then we put all these layers on top as we grow, as children and then into adults, and we end up as this big ball here that's got all these layers. I said, but whatever form of therapy you go into, I said, it's about stripping all those layers away and finding, what is that little nugget there in the middle? Who is that? Who is that little person in there? And I said, you find that little person in there, and then you think, oh, everything else was just made up. It was all about trying to be safe. And I think that there's so much anti-neurodivergency at the moment
Yeah.
out there. You know, all those questions about why suddenly are we having all of these diagnoses? Well, it hasn't. ADHD and autism hasn't just appeared like that in midlife. It's always been there. We were born like it, but we just didn't know about it back then.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, and I think it's about having the confidence to say, yes, my brain works differently. You know, I don't subscribe to all this about it being a superpower and stuff. I just believe we all have our own place. And a neurodivergent brain has a different place, that's all.
Yeah.
And we have skills that maybe others don't. But together, you know, human beings, we're meant to work like this together. We're not
Yeah.
meant to be working as individuals. We're meant to work together. And you include a neurodivergent brain in there, and it will change everything.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a little bit off track.
No, that's fine. I think it's interesting what you say about being, like you say, stripping away those layers. One thing I found in recovery is I spent so long trying to hide my eating disorder and pretend that everything's perfect and wanted to
Yep.
portray as perfect because I was a people pleaser and a perfectionist, which all fed into my eating disorder. And like you say, I remember being told it was about trying to find who I authentically was without all of that, without it all. And I'm not that much different, but I am different because I'm stronger and I'm more confident and I don't care anymore what people think. And I think it's important, like you say, for me, both body wise, but also with my ADHD, that just to be unapologetic.
Absolutely.
If I'm not what everybody else is like, or if I do things or look a certain way that other people don't like, I don't care anymore.
No, no,
Which
not
is,
at all.
like you say, it's maybe a gift of getting older. It's maybe a gift of having gone through recovery. It's maybe a gift of coming to terms with my ADHD. It might be a mix of all of those. But I think it's important for people, and it might feel hard, but if you can find the help, either with your ADHD or your eating disorder, that actually you can get to that place where you don't apologise anymore for what you look like, for the things you say, for the little things about you that maybe people think are a little bit strange or a little bit whatever they want to call them. And I think that's as good a place as any of us could get to. And I just wanted to mention before I forget that you look incredible for 71. So
Oh, thank
whatever you
you.
are doing is definitely working, Carol.
Thank
It
you.
is definitely
Thank
working for you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I am lucky. I'm fortunate that in my mother's family we have good skin.
Yeah,
But also from a 12-year-old, she taught me how to look after my face, and never put it in the sun, all that sort of thing. But I think also how we are on the inside is reflected in our face. And I see people with dead eyes
yeah,
on TV, politicians, whatever. And I just think, okay, you're dead inside, right? I feel more alive now, I think, than I probably ever have.
yeah,
And and friends who have known me for a long time, they all say I look better now than I ever have.
yeah.
And yet I'm getting on now and I've got wrinkles.
I completely agree. I believe that eyes are a window to the soul, and I sometimes will meet someone, and there'll be something about I very much, and there's a certain I certainly think you can see a real kindness in eyes when you come across
Yeah.
a really genuine, kind person. And like you say, sometimes when you come across a person who will make me feel a certain kind of way, and you look in their eyes, I think you can tell a lot. I agree. Windows, eyes definitely window to the soul.
Mm.
Let's. So I want to kind of wrap it up, Carol. So if there
Hmm.
are people listening, I obviously want you to share your information. I'm not an ADHD expert. My main specialism is eating disorders. If there is someone who is struggling with ADHD
Hmm.
and they are looking for help outside of medication, what
Yeah.
kind of help could someone like you give someone who doesn't want to take medication but just needs a little bit of reassurance or guidance on how they can cope with ADHD symptoms or even realize their ADHD symptoms to kind of put things in place? So when you work
Absolutely.
with people, is what kind of things then do you do with people to help them with that?
Well, I have come right back. I experienced burnout last year, and now I'm looking after my grandson 3 days a week. So I've had to draw my horns in quite a lot. So I basically now just work with people one to one,
Yeah,
and from as little as having one session where we create like a 3-point plan to go forward,
yeah,
to we might agree, well, okay, we'll have 6 sessions. After that we'll do 6 sessions and we will cover X, Y, and Z. To other people who they want to check in once a month, or something like that.
yeah.
They don't want anything that's prescriptive.
Yeah. They just want someone to talk to if they need it.
Yeah, and I think that I can plug them into WhatsApp groups, different WhatsApp groups that I'm in, as well, which can help. And I have my own WhatsApp group for
Yeah,
everybody that comes through. But I belong to a grandparents WhatsApp group, set up by a colleague of mine, and actually there are some parents in there as well, but which is really supportive. And I think that there's, because some of the groups out there, they're large and they're overwhelming.
yeah,
It becomes too much, and some people find WhatsApp groups too much, even that really. So I don't, yeah, I don't have this thing of, well, you could do this and this and this and this, because when I'm faced with that, I'm going, the barrier comes up and I go, it's too much information.
yeah,
So we normally start with just a session, normally online, and we map out 3 changes that they wish to make, and we map that out for a month, and then they come back a month later, and we go from there, and we just do it as they want to do it.
yeah. Because everyone's
So
ADHD is slightly different. So, like you say, it has
everybody's
to be very
different,
personal.
right? Yeah, everybody's family is different, everybody's setup is different, um, and everybody's, those who might think, well, maybe I do have an eating disorder. I, because of the nature of eating disorders, therapists tend to work only in the area with which they have a personal experience. And when it comes to anorexia, it's a very specific and prescriptive thing.
Yeah,
So I tend not to go there. But what I find with, and is mostly women that come to me, is that they might think they might have binge eating disorder, for instance,
yeah,
um, or they're struggling with, like, my son-in-law. He doesn't eat any fruit and veg at all. So, they will come to me and say, I can't do that. But so how do I encourage my children to eat it if I'm not eating it?
Yeah.
So it can be a simple thing, you know?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about changing the world and having therapy for years and years. It could be
Mm.
just they have a question and they want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I am quite happy to do, um, half-hour sessions with people and not charge them because I just want to share. And it sounds really weird. My business coach, when I had one, said, "You can't do that. You can't give it all away for free." That's why I don't give it all away for free. I just want to give something back.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people need more and some people need less. And I think, like you say, certainly when you've when you've learnt a lot through, I'll use the word suffering, but some of us have to suffer to learn.
Yeah,
And then there is an element of us that wants to give back, isn't there? Because
yeah,
you don't want to go through all of that to not make
yeah,
it better for somebody else.
yeah. And I think that for me, that's come with being older and observing the world and seeing what goes on in the world and actually wanting there to be more love. It sounds very, you know, middle class and white and everything else, but it's like, no, actually, I would just like people to like each other a bit more, be sharesy, a bit more caring for other people. Um, it doesn't take much to do that.
No, and if everybody did a bit, the world, I agree, would be a better place. Where can people find you, Carol, if they are interested in having a chat with you, or like you say, whether it's a plan, whether it's issues around food, whether it's about their ADHD, where can they find you?
So the main two places I am is, well, I am on Instagram as the ADHD health coach. I do post sometimes on Threads, but mostly Facebook or LinkedIn is where I hang out. And I am the ADHD health coach there. My photograph is the same on all of the platforms. And just private message me. Just private
Great.
message me. Just try and keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much for your time, Carol. I found that really interesting. And I hope that people do reach out and connect because, like I say, I
Yeah,
certainly still probably have questions around my HD, so I might be dropping
right.
into your inbox.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm
But
quite
I
happy,
appreciate your
happy to have a
time.
conversation, Tara.
I appreciate your time this evening.
You're
And
very welcome.
yeah, maybe, and as my podcast gets further in, I am going to maybe look to come back with guests with questions and answers. So, maybe reaching out to my followers when I've had published a podcast, uh,
Yep,
see if people have questions and answers that we can revisit and maybe they can get answers by the two of us again. So hopefully we might meet again on another podcast.
absolutely. Yes, that would be lovely.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your time, Carol.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.